After the proclamation of the Commission of Inquiry, it was decided that Bernadette was now so famous, and indeed so were her family, that it wasn't even good enough that they should live in the Gras mill, which they had moved to after they had been in the Cachot. So now they were actually given by the civic authorities a lovely home of their own. It was called at that time the Lacedet Mill. It was a mill again, but we have come to know it as the Maison Paternelle, meaning the family home. So this was the first place that the Soubirous family ever owned. It's an absolute must when you're in Lourdes to visit this place, because it's exactly now as it was in the days of Bernadette. They haven't messed it about too much, modernising it and that kind of thing. It's a lovely old place to see. It's got a rickety staircase. Of course, it's got a mill at the bottom of it with the same Lepaca stream rushing through it, no doubt making a loud noise in those days. Got 2 or 3 bedrooms, nice kitchen. It must have been a really lovely place for the family to live. Of course, living there at that time would have been Bernadette's 2 parents, Toinette, the sister who was with her down at the grotto at the first apparition, Jean-Marie, the brother, Justin, her youngest brother, who sadly was to die 2 or 3 years later. But in the meantime, 1 year after the apparitions, Louise Soubirous had had another child, a little baby called Pierre. And it was one of Bernadette's greatest joys of her life, she used to say, that she had been made the godmother of little Pierre. And now we have to fast forward 4 years to 1866. The reason I'm doing that is because that's the year when the chapel that the Lady of the Grotto had asked for was completed. We know this chapel as the crypt. It's a beautiful little place and a must for all pilgrims coming to Lourdes. Later on, only 5 years later, the Immaculate Conception Basilica was built on top of that chapel. So you can see the chapel really as the basement, the sort of vault of the main church. And below the chapel, many years later in 1901, the Rosary Basilica was built. And so those 3 buildings now constitute the beautiful vista of Lourdes, which we all now know. The Upper Basilica, the Little Chapel, and the Rosary Basilica. Bernadette was still in Lourdes in 1866, and it was her pleasure and privilege to be there when that chapel was consecrated in May of that year. But big decisions were looming. Could Bernadette stay in Lourdes, even though she was a boarder at the hospice with the sisters? No, it wasn't right. Bernadette was such a figure of importance, such a celebrity, it was quite impossible that she should stay in Lourdes because so many people would want to see her as processions and pilgrimages grew. So the big decision was taken, even bigger than when she was sent to the hospice in Lourdes, that she should leave Lourdes for the mother house of the sisters of the hospice in Lourdes in a place called Nevers, 400 miles north of Lourdes. Bernadette agreed with the decision. She thought it was right. She didn't want to do that, but she knew that for her it was right. And so a farewell for Lourdes to Lourdes had to take place. The first part of the farewell was for Bernadette to go down to the grotto, to say a finishing prayer there at the grotto in front of that statue, which she didn't really approve of, made by Monsieur Fabiche. And as she left, she said to her friends, the grotto was my heaven. She went home being, of course, the Maison Paternelle, and the family, all of them, gathered round for one farewell meal. The meal was hopelessly sad. I don't suppose they enjoyed the food much at all, because everyone was crying. And Bernadette said to them, please don't cry. I've got to leave Lourdes. I've got to leave Lourdes forever. It's the right thing for me. And so she did. So the very next day, Bernadette, accompanied by two of the sisters from the convent in Lourdes, went to the station in Lourdes, the self-same station which we all use to this day, and caught the train for the 2-day, 400-mile journey to Nevers in the middle of France. She never went back to Lourdes. She never saw her parents again. She never saw any member of her family again. Worse still, 5 months after she arrived in Nevers, news reached her that her mother, Louise, at the age of 41, had died. Just think of the sadness for Bernadette that this mother that she'd known so well and loved so much had gone. And the strange thing is, or the extraordinary thing is, perhaps I should say, that she died on December the 8th, the feast of the Immaculate Conception. Coincidence? You make up your mind. Anyway, Bernadette arrives at Nevers, a huge building, awesome type place. And in that building, there are many upper-class, talented, gifted, clever nuns. Nuns who could only go to that convent if they brought in a diary with her. So Bernadette would have been one of the few who goes to the convent without bringing in a diary. Imagine all of the feelings that she would have had facing up to this completely different set of circumstances to the ones that she knew in the past. She would have been terribly homesick, of course, and I'm sad to say, in addition to being homesick, she was genuinely sick. She had a terrible asthma attack within a few months of arriving and very nearly died. It was a tough call for Bernadette going to Nevers.